Thank you very much for that awkward start to proceedings. Right. Okay, in 2014, a survey undertaken by the charity Scope claimed that many non-disabled people in Britain today feel awkward around disabled people. In spite of the much vaunted positive vibes about disability resulting from the Paralympics, apparently 2/3 of those surveyed said they feared doing or saying the wrong thing to disabled people, a fear which stemmed from lack of understanding and not knowing people with disabilities as friends, family members or workmates. The report indicated that feelings of awkwardness were, surprisingly I thought, stronger in younger people who were less likely to interact with people with disabilities and were more noticeable around mental health and learning disability and invisible impairments more generally compared to visible, physical or sensory impairment. Respondents felt particularly uncomfortable with the idea of a person with a disability occupying a position of authority, although again there's a difference between learning disability and mental health compared to other impairments. In contrast, Scope's disabled respondents commonly reported that some people had doubted their disability or that they'd been addressed in a patronising way, reflecting society's low expectations of them. It was high time, concluded Scope, that we should end the awkward. To help break down the discomfort around disability, it issued a series of hints and tips on how non-disabled people should respond to those with disabilities in common situations, from dating to using public transport. Awkward is a cultural buzzword used today to describe a variety of embarrassing, uncomfortable or cringe-worthy encounters or experiences. But in spite of the word's ubiquity, the awkward has received relatively little theorisation or critical reflection. In one of the few exceptions, a media studies academic, Jason Middleton, in his book Documentary's Awkward Turn, published last year, describes awkward moments as occurring when an established mode of representation or reception is unexpectedly challenged, stalled, or altered. Awkward is a shared emotion with a strong somatic element. Central to modern awkwardness is the cringe factor, the almost unbearable feeling of tension when a person does or says the wrong thing, misreads a situation, or misunderstands the appropriate boundaries of interaction. Ultimately, the tensions raised are often resolved using humour as a means of coming to terms with and dissipating the embarrassment of the situation. So as part of its campaign to end the awkward, Scope encouraged disabled people to share their funny stories of awkward moments, challenging and neutralising discomfort about disability through shared laughter, such as these quirky Valentine's cards shown here. Shows with the slogan, "Get your cane, you've pulled," which I thought was a line from 50 Shades of Grey, but there we are. Anyway, Scope's survey was not concerned with how attitudes towards disability have evolved over time, or in particular social and cultural contexts. But across the world, many people, from activists to academic historians like me, are asking these kinds of questions. As a historian, I'm interested in where the awkwardness described in Scope's report comes from. Has disability always caused awkwardness, or is this something new? The discomfort identified by Scope seems to be heavily rooted in modern concerns. Thanks to equality legislation and institutional codes of disability etiquette, there's a greater awareness amongst non-disabled people that there are certain things that they should or shouldn't say to people with disabilities. But there remains uncertainty about what these are, which makes people feel safer perhaps to avoid contact altogether. But has interaction between disabled and non-disabled people always been shrouded with awkwardness and discomfort? More fundamentally, how have the meanings of disability and awkwardness changed over time? So there are many representations of disabled people within the social landscape of 18th century Britain. This slide here shows a man called Charles McGee, who was a well-known character on the streets of London in the early 19th century. possibly because he had the best ever hat, this amazing ship on his head. And he was, this is a drawing by an artist called John Thomas Smith. It's part of a series of etchings of disabled beggars in London, published under the title Vagabondiana in 1816. Both disability and awkwardness are categories that change over time. In the 18th century, the term disabled was used to describe people with impairments, but it was often used in a more narrow and exclusive way than we do today, most often to refer to soldiers and sailors who had been maimed in conflict. So the term denoted an honourable sacrifice, which meant, in theory at least, those who were disabled on the battlefield could claim a special status amongst the impaired, even though in reality many disabled veterans struggled to make a living. But during the 18th century, we also see attempts to reimagine disability in ways that drew attention to positive qualities of people with disabilities rather than their perceived disorderliness and unsightliness. So I want to end this talk by briefly examining two examples of this: the artist Matthew Buckinger and the Member of Parliament and autobiographer William Hay. Matthew Buckinger was born in Nuremberg in 1674 and came to England shortly after the accession of King George I in 1714. According to a text that he wrote to accompany a self-portrait he made in 1724, he stood but 29 inches high and lacked hands, feet and thighs. But, he said, this hadn't stopped him marrying 4 times, siring 11 children, and displaying remarkable musical and artistic ability. He listed these talents. So he played on various sorts of music to admiration. He was no less eminent for writing, drawing coats of arms and pictures to the life with a pen, as well as performing magic tricks, throwing swords, and firing a pistol. Not all at the same time. Buckinger was one of several internationally renowned performers who toured Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. At a time when the freak show was becoming associated with the vulgar tastes of the lower orders, his version of human exhibition was a respectable one, and he deliberately courted a wealthy and cultured audience from whom he sought patronage as an artist and an engraver. This slide shows an advert handbill for one of his performances, and you can see how he courts respectability because he has the royal coat of arms at the top as a kind of seal of approval. And here he is. This is a self-portrait from 1724. And he depicts himself framed in an oval against an elaborate backdrop. There's sort of hearts and sort of elaborate penmanship, which kind of resembles a playing card, which might perhaps allude to his skill at gaming, but it also serves as an advert for his remarkable penmanship. He sits in the middle of this oval on a cushion, and he's dressed in a very genteel manner, in waistcoat, cravat, and coat, and he's wearing a wig, which wasn't just a fashion accessory, but is also a symbol of masculine authority. In the picture, his stumps are visible, but the viewer's eye is drawn towards his face, which stares proudly back. It's an image that exudes satisfaction with his lot, and it resembles the portraits of gentlemen and wealthy merchants, which were becoming popular as status symbols at this time. He seems to present himself on this cushion as a kind of commodity, something for the pleasure or satisfaction of his spectators. But there's also a sense here of his physical difference as something that's potentially lucrative, giving him access to the social circles of his wealthy patrons. In his visual and textual self-portrait, physical impairment, when supported by a variety of remarkable skills which challenge expectations of what a person born without limbs could do, is presented as neither a barrier to commercial success nor to social advancement. It's an image that presents the disabled body not as an awkward antithesis to polite aspiration, but as its very embodiment. A second example is an autobiography called Deformity, an Essay, published in 1754. It's written by William Hay, and it's been described by modern disability scholars as the first text to conceptualize and articulate physical disability as personal identity. Hay was born in 1695 to an ancient family settled in Sussex, so he was very posh. He had a congenital deformity caused by the curving of his back in the womb. He originally trained as a lawyer, but he had his studies cut short by smallpox, which left him visually impaired as well. He married in 1731 and entered Parliament as MP for Seaford in East Sussex in January 1734. He wrote on a variety of topics, but he's best known for his autobiographical account of his own experiences as a deformed man, published a year before his death from an apoplectic fit in 1755, which I think is a stroke. So I'm going to conclude with a few final points. Now, Hay and Buckinger seem strikingly modern. Buckinger's visual self-fashioning shows how people with disabilities sought control of the artistic process long before modern disability arts. And Hay's attempts to fashion a cheerful, refined version of deformity that challenged its association with poverty and devaluation, and showed instead how physical difference could act as a spur to a more cultivated state of being, provides a bold refutation of dominant cultural values. And this sits well with today's exploration and celebration of diversity. But studying these men and how they represented themselves, in fact, raises some awkward questions that caution us against reading modern values into pre-modern texts and images. Firstly, and most striking perhaps, neither Buckinger nor Hay expressed any solidarity with other dispossessed groups. Both were products of and fully complicit in the inequalities of 18th century society. Buckinger's proud assertion of his marital history and potency sought status and legitimacy through asserting his patriarchal authority. One story circulating at the time related how he'd been abused by his second wife, until one day he brutally reasserted his dominance by nearly beating her to death with his stumps. While this may have been idle gossip, it nevertheless chimes with Buckinger's self-image as a hyper-masculine figure. Hay had little solidarity with other outsider groups, and his text is noticeably silent on the experiences of deformed women, which is a problem, I think, with studying disability in the 18th century more generally, with just very, very few representations of women. And also in a telling passage, he explained that his experience of healthy difference put him at what he saw as a clear advantage over the blind and the lame, as he called them, with whom he felt no connection. His text recommended neutralizing the potential awkwardness of the encounter between the deformed person and others by using a form of self-deprecating humor, by joining in at the jokes made at his own expense. Good humor was widely recommended as a coping strategy for the physically different in 18th century England. But self-deprecation, we could say, arguably reinforced stereotypes of difference rather than challenging them. Disability history allows us to question narratives of progress by showing how things we consider recent, such as the celebration of diversity, are not new. But we need to view ideas and historical actors in the context of their own times. From unruly disabled beggars to those who crafted a genteel self-image that refused to devalue their difference, we need to hear more about history's awkward bastards. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Take a couple of questions.